الحمد لله رب العالمين هو الذي جعل المسلمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship anywhere, anytime, any place, except only Allah. This statement is the famous statement made by all of the prophets, from Adam, Abraham, Moses, David, Suleiman, John the Baptist, Jesus Christ, peace be upon them all, and of course Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him. And this is the statement of which those who choose not to believe, they hate this probably more than anything else. They will stop at nothing to put that down. And in the last days, the Prophet ﷺ told us that there was not going to be like a bunch of religions anymore. There will be Iman and Kufr. True belief and disbelief. Are we seeing that today? We're going to find out in our program tonight. And to help us to know more about this topic and what's called Mulhideen in the Arabic language, those who choose not to believe anything at all. To help us know more about it is all the way from the United Kingdom, our brother and Sheikh of debate in Islam, our brother Hamza Yusuf is with us right now. And no, this is Hamza Tzortzis. No, I'm getting closer though, right? Who knows? Maybe by the end of the program, I'll figure it out. Meantime, let's listen to what Hamza Tzortzis has to tell us about that subject. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, brothers and sisters, we're here to remind ourselves about a very important topic, which is the topic of one God, one religion. Now, when I think about one God, one religion, I'm thinking about the statement that Sheikh Yusuf S. has just made, which was, there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah. And this is a profound statement. It's not just a set of words, but it is a set of words with profound meaning that should internalize in one's heart and one's mind, that would change the way we see the entire world. And it changes the way we are. Not just what we do, but our state of being. We're not human doings, we're human beings. So when we understand this profound statement, that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, it changes everything. So from the context of atheism, I like to really turn the tables, because I don't really think, in my limited experience, that atheism is an intellectual issue. I sincerely do not believe atheism is an intellectual issue. The issue is fundamentally something else. The issue is fundamentally something else. I would say it's a psychodynamic, psychological, spiritual, existential issue. Now, what do I mean by this? Let me start with some first principles. Everything has first principles, brothers and sisters and friends. Everything has first principles. What do we mean by first principles? It's the ideas that you require to adopt in order for you to understand anything about a particular sphere of knowledge. Let me repeat. A first principle is an idea that you adopt, that you have to accept in order for you to progress in knowledge in anything. Let me give you an example. Let's take science, for example, right? So in my postgrad, I specialize in the philosophy of science. And in science, you see there's a whole set of assumptions, first principles. One of the key first principles of science is that nature is uniform. Nature is uniform. For example, if you observe 20% of the universe, and in that 20% of the universe, you notice that gravity is working, there is a law of attraction between two masses, then you can come to the conclusion, based upon the assumption that nature is uniform, that gravity exists in the whole universe. But we will never observe the entire universe. We will always have limited observations And based on the assumption that nature is uniform, then we could make the conclusions that we make. This is an assumption. Another assumption in science, and by the way, we love science, but we have to understand its limitation and role. Another assumption of science is that there are causes and effects, and that these causes and effects are outside of our minds. For example, if I were to pick up an object and I will throw it in the air, the cause is my hand moving, the effect is the object in the air. But the link between the cause and the effect cannot be seen. What is the nature of the causal link? We know there is a cause and we know there is an effect, but we can't really see the link. This is an assumption that you have to accept, that there are these links existing in the real world, external to our minds, for science to exist. And you may be thinking, Hamza, this sounds very complicated. Good. Let me give you more examples. Another example of first principles. Take, for example, in the philosophy of politics. Generally speaking, in the West, there's the idea of freedom. Okay? And freedom, according to most of the thinkers, has intrinsic value. Meaning, it is an end. It is not a means. It is an end in itself. Now, the only way they justify that is based upon their intuitions. Intuitions. So they basically saying that a first principle is that you could trust your intuition in order to understand anything about the political life, such as concepts like freedom. There are first principles for absolutely everything. If you go to neuroscience, science, philosophy, politics, understanding the world, for example, you have to believe that the world is actually external to your mind. After all, your mind could be on Mars, and there are metal probes in your brain making you think and feel what you're thinking and feeling right now. You can't prove, right, from that point of view that the world is actually real, but people accept it as a first principle. Now, why am I talking about first principles? Because Islam has its own first principles. And the mistake that we do when we're talking to atheists and anybody is that we forget our own Islamic thought. We forget our understanding of ourselves and reality. We totally dismiss it. We commit epistemicide, right? Epistemicide means that we kill our roots to knowledge and our sources of knowledge because we adopt alien philosophies. I'm not saying they're wrong, but they have to be based upon what we consider the Quran and the Sunnah, the first principles. And this is the difference between blameworthy ilm al-kalam and talking about Islam. We have to base things on our first principle. So what's our first principle? The fitrah. The word fitrah comes from the Arabic triliteral stem, fatara, which you have words like fatrun and fatarahu. Something has been created within us. It's created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that contains knowledge. The ulama, they agree on two aspects of knowledge and there's ikhtilaf on a third. The two aspects of knowledge is that Allah is a reality and that He deserves praise. We know this from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when after Fajr they go to the nearby towns and they would hear if they're praying, they're doing the adhan for Fajr, right? So they would hear Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, and the Prophet ﷺ say, this is fitrah. And then when they continued the adhan, he said, this is Islam. So there is a distinction between fitrah and Islam from the point of view that fitrah is the basic acknowledgement of Allah and the fact that He deserves praise. He deserves praise. So this is contained in the fitrah. And we know there's another hadith from the Prophet ﷺ in Sahih Muslim where the Prophet ﷺ said, every child is born in a state of fitrah, but his parents basically change him into something else. The ulama expand this and they say the fitrah gets clouded. The fitrah that already contains the truth of Allah's reality and the fact that He deserves praise, it gets clouded because of sin, because of education, because of society, because of parents. So from our point of view as Muslims, our job is not just to focus on rational arguments or to give some kind of algorithm to make them lead to Iman. No, our job is merely to help people uncloud the fitrah, to awaken the truth within. Let me repeat. Our job is to help people go on their spiritual journey, to uncloud their fitrah, to awaken the truth within. And the truth within is that Allah is a reality and He deserves praise. This is the first principle of Islam, which is very important. Because if we don't understand the human being as the human being, we're going to treat the human being like a computerized model that you give him some kind of scientific rational argument thinking is going to lead to iman. That is not the case. The human being has a ruh, has an aql, has a qalb, has a nafsiyah and a psychological disposition. So we need to see the human being as the human being, not some kind of computerized functional model. So when we understand the human being having a fitrah, and in that fitrah has knowledge of Allah that He is a reality, and the fact that He deserves praise, if we know this about the human being, it changes our entire da'wah. It changes the way we convey Islam, and it changes the way we understand human beings. Because every human being is based on innate goodness. Innate goodness, that there is a fitrah within that human being, but it has become clouded. Our job is to help them uncloud the fitrah, to awaken the truth within. And we have the ayah in the Quran in chapter 30, verse 30, etc., concerning these principles. So this is a very important first principle to understand when conveying Islam to anybody. Our job is not to convince or to give them some super rational argument, somehow that's going to lead to iman. No, because there are many ways to uncloud the fitrah. One way, as Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said, is to use sound aql, a sound intellect. Another way is to give them direct access to the Quran. Just let them have direct access to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I was in Qatar and I basically gave an atheist just the logical principles in chapter 52, verse 35 to 36. Did you come from nothing? Did you create yourself? Did you create the heavens and the earth? And he was answering the questions, and from an atheist he said, yes, there must be an uncreated creator. Just by asking the questions, gives them direct access to revelation. Sometimes that might not work. Based on the wisdom of Allah, it might be personal experiences. As we know, when Allah refers to the mushrikeen, when they're on the boat and there are clouds of waves coming, then they remember Allah. This negative experience makes them understand the inner realities. So the point is, there are many ways to awaken the truth within. There are many ways to awaken the fitrah. And that's why you shouldn't just think the only way to give da'wah is through this rational algorithm, this rational argument that I think is so great, and if they don't understand, I'm going to debate until the cows come home. No! Have intellectual and spiritual maturity. Have intellectual and spiritual maturity that you must understand. I've given them a really good perspective, a Quranic argument, a sound aqli argument. If they now still have shubahat, they have doubts and huge concerns, you must understand that this has nothing to do with reason, it's something else going on. You need a different strategy. Buy them a coffee, buy them a pizza, have good akhlaq and adab, have a human connection with that person. That might be the way to uncloud the fitrah. I'll give you an example. I was speaking with an atheist once and I was talking about the Quranic argument for God's existence, if I remember correctly. And it was a very powerful argument. And they said, okay, but what was God doing for eternity before He created the universe? And for me, this is a qarina, this is an indication there is something happening within the person. It's nothing to do with aql. Because if I don't answer the question, does it affect my argument? Of course not. I responded in a joke. I said, did you know me for 36 years, 37 years? Just because you didn't know what I was doing doesn't mean that I don't exist. Right? Everyone started laughing. Now, for me, that was an indication that I shouldn't respond to him, but I should now take him for lunch. Really engage with him in a personal way, to make him taste Islam, not just to think in an abstract, rational way. Because sometimes we don't have that intellectual and spiritual maturity, and we think, no, we have to answer all the questions. SubhanAllah, not even Allah answers all the questions. Only a fool answers all the questions. Sometimes Allah gives us questions and He doesn't give us a direct conclusion. Allah is teaching us how to think. Take for example the point I mentioned earlier in chapter 52 verse 35 to 36. It's full of questions. Did you create yourself? Did you come from nothing? Did you create yourself? Did you create the heavens and the earth? بَلْ لَا يُقِنُونَ. Indeed you have no certainty. Where's the direct answer? Allah is teaching us, if you ask the right questions and you have a sincere heart, it would lead to the right answer. Because it's about awakening the truth within. So, this is our first principle, the principle of the fitrah. It changes everything you see. It changes the way you see yourself and other people and the entire universe, and how you would approach the human being to awaken the truth within. You don't just rely on just abstract rational arguments. Wallahi, It could be just having hilm, forbearance. Allah is al-Halim, He is the forbearing. And we must have hilm from a human point of view. In actual fact, if we remember the famous hadith, I believe it's in Sahih Bukhari, with the Jewish man. He came to the Prophet ﷺ and pulled him by the neck and left a mark because he owed him some money. And one of the Sahaba wanted to basically deal with the person appropriately, and the Prophet ﷺ responded with hilm, with halim. He had forbearance. He said to the Sahabi, we expected something from you, that you advised me to give the money, and you advised him to ask for his money in the most appropriate way. Upon hearing this, the Jewish man became a Muslim because he saw 2 signs out of the 3 signs of prophethood. And the final sign was forbearance, repelling evil by that which is better. Allah says in chapter 41, verse 34, Allah says in the Quran, good and evil are not the same. Good and evil are not the same. Repel by that which is better. The Arabic word repel is not followed by a direct object, meaning it's open-ended. Repel by that which is better, and between 2 people there was hatred, it would turn into intimate friendship. This is the Quran. This is not me saying this, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's use this in our da'wah to have a sense of forbearance. Maybe your character will have more power than your rational arguments. I'm telling you, maybe your character will have more power than your rational arguments. Allah is making it very clear. And by the way, the Mufassirin, they say repelling evil, repelling anything by that which is better, is to repel anything with what is more beautiful and what is more virtuous. Let me give you a story. It wasn't me, there was a brother, he was outside a shopping center in London, big shopping center. He had a dawah table, dawah booth, and there was a lady that came up to him and spat on his face. He kept on smiling. He was a man of sunnah, smiling. He took a tissue, wiped his face. Then he got another tissue, he gave it to her. Because she had some of her own saliva on her face, and she ran away. After some while, she came back, she became a Muslim. After a while, they got married. So sister, do you want a good husband? Spit on him first. But the point here is, responding to evil by that which is more beautiful and virtuous is actually one of the ways that you could awaken the truth within someone. This is why don't neglect your character. So what, akhi, I'm giving him Quran and Sunnah. Yeah, but Quran and Sunnah is not just statements. Quran and Sunnah is the internalization of those statements. You can know all of the hadith on dhikr, all of the ayat on dhikr, and you will never become a person of dhikr. You can know all of the ayat on rahmah, all of the hadith on rahmah, and you will still never become a person of rahmah. Sometimes our abstract knowledge and who we become, there is always a gap. For example, you all know what it means to have a healthy life. Exercise every day, eat your greens, eat healthy foods, don't fry your food, eat lots of vegetables and salads, correct? What do you have for lunch though? There is a gap between what you know and who you become. Islam, when it comes to ilm in Islam, we've misunderstood it. We think it's just memorization, abstract, like an iPad. No, Imam Malik said, ilm is the nur Allah puts in your heart, that you've internalized the deen. He would even say, in a particular context, Imam Malik, rahimahullah, that 7-year-olds should not be forced to memorize the whole Quran. 7-year-olds should not be forced to memorize the whole Quran. And we see this in the life of some Sahaba. One Sahabi, took him 9 years to memorize Surah Al-Baqarah. 9 years! It could take you 9 weeks. But those 9 years were life-changing. Every ayah he understood, did tadabbur, knew the meaning, internalized within his own being for a whole 9 years. Not only did he memorize Surah Al-Baqarah, he became Surah Al-Baqarah. There's a big
I like that.
Yeah, there's a big difference. And a huge problem in the ummah, I'm going to be honest, it's not knowledge of hadith and Quran. Because some of you, and ask any student of knowledge, I'm not a student of knowledge, I'm not even a sheikh. They're calling me sheikh, they shouldn't. I'm nothing. But listen to this. Ask them. There are some people in this room that know more hadith than some Sahaba. This is a fact. There are some people in this room that know more Quran than some Sahaba. This is a historical fact. And this doesn't belong to the Sahaba, by the way. This belongs to us. Because even the small things that they may have known, it changed everything. Because they internalized it. They internalized it. Now we've become iPads. My iPad is a Hafid. My iPad has books on Usul al-Fiqh. My iPad has Bukhari in it. I don't see my iPad doing much. So I'm not belittling knowledge, by the way. I'm trying to redefine what true knowledge is. It's not information. It's not information, it's knowledge, which is you've internalized that which you know. You've become that which you know. It changes your state of being, who you become. And this is the hardest thing. In my humble opinion, the way to establish this is to sit at the feet of the ulama and to learn. Because wallahi, you would learn from the ulama that which you would never learn from a book. That's a guarantee. And I learned this the hard way. You learn from the scholars what you would never learn from a book. And we have this unwritten law in our tradition. The scholar of the Prophet ﷺ was Jibreel alayhi salam. The scholar of the Sahaba was the Prophet ﷺ. The scholars of the Tabi'een were the Sahaba. Do you see my point? There's this kind of, the way we learned things, it wasn't directly just via a book. It was via a process of learning, which is a process of experience, a process of humility, to be honest. And I've seen this with my friends. One of my friends was studying Bukhari. The isnad, the matan, the chain of narration, the text itself, the interpretations. When he stopped studying, I could always see a difference in his character, wallahi. It's just the experience. And he would do this with a sheikh in the Asian subcontinent via Skype. And when he would stop sometimes, I'll always notice that his kibr went a little bit higher. And I would say to him, bro, you've stopped reading Bukhari. Because even the words of the Prophet ﷺ have an effect on you. Just directly having an access in the process of learning the Sunnah changes your entire life. So this is the first principle of Islam. So I'm just going to apologize. I'm going to finish in 4 minutes. So what should be our main focus? Our main focus should not be on a proof, but rather on a redirection. Let me repeat. Our focus should not be on a proof, it should be on a redirection. Because everyone is in a state of worship. But many people have misdirected worship. Even the atheists worship. The Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in chapter 39 verse 29, consider the situation of two people. One man is a slave to many masters and they're all arguing. And another man is a slave to one master. Whose condition is best? Allah is describing the reality of the human being. If you don't worship Allah, you're worshipping something else. Because if you define worship in the following way, to know something ultimately the most, to love something ultimately the most, to obey something ultimately the most, and to direct your internal and external acts of worship to something the most. We are all doing this to an object. For example, those who are nationalists, they worshipping their nation state, or the idea of nationalism, right? Because they always want to know about the nation state the most, their history, the DNA pool, the gene pool, the glory of their civilization, right? That's what they want to know all the time the most. They love it the most. They put tattoos of the flag, they will die for the flag. Dying and sacrificing for something is like the highest form of love from that point of view. The third point, they obey those who represent nationalism as an ideology. Their figureheads. Whatever they said, it must be true. They have this reverence and obedience to the representatives of their ideological perspective. And they worship the idea of nationalism. Why? Because a key act of worship is hamd, shukr. They ultimately are grateful to the nation. If it wasn't for this land and this idea that I've made up, that someone drew lines on a map, if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't be here today, I wouldn't be alive. So that's their object of worship. Similarly, even from a popular point of view, our object of worship, especially for teenagers, could be, for example, a singer. Justin Bieber, for example. That's the only person they want to know the most. They go on Facebook, Twitter, magazines. All their time, they're focusing ultimately to know about Justin Bieber. They also love Justin Bieber. They'll write in their diaries, oh, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be, I wouldn't have a sense of meaning in his music, right? That's an act of worship. Also, obedience. If he came out in the public and started eating spinach, teenage girls would be eating spinach, right? And also, they direct internal acts of worship like gratitude towards him the most. They buy his memorabilia, the expensive tickets. I know this is a crude example, but you're getting the point here. So the thing that you ultimately want to know the most, ultimately love the most, ultimately obey the most, and ultimately direct your internal and external acts of worship to the most, that is your object of worship. And everybody worships, even if they're an atheist. And you could just ask the following question: what do you love the most? What do you want to know the most? What do you obey the most, ultimately? And what are you grateful to the most, ultimately? If they give you a thing or things, that's the object of worship. So they have misdirected worship. Because the role of the prophets is to take people away from this misdirected worship to understand that the only being worthy of worship is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'll end on this point. There are many reasons why Allah deserves worship. Let me just give you one. One of the reasons is by virtue of His names and attributes. It has nothing to do with the fact that He created you. It has nothing to do with the fact that He gave you blessings. That's a bonus. And that's true, we must be grateful. But the main point is we must understand that we shouldn't have a transactional relationship with Allah. We're not peers in a business transaction. Allah gives us something and we give Him salah in return. This is a false understanding of Tawheed, a false understanding of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I met a student a few years ago and he said, I stopped praying because I failed my exams. Oh, who the hell are you? Who the hell are you? The only reason you prayed because you wanted to pass your exams? Allah deserves worship by virtue of who He is. SubhanAllah, we praise people all the time. Ronaldo, great football player, wicked, what a great goal. Look at this nasheed artist. Oh, great poetry. Iqbal, the poet of the East. Amazing poetry. We see sports people. We praise them by virtue of their attributes, their sporting attributes. We praise them by virtue of their poetic skill. We praise them by virtue of who they are and their abilities. But they don't benefit us in any way. But we naturally still praise them. What does this mean about praising Allah? Whose names and attributes are perfect, are maximally perfect, that they are to the highest degree possible. They have no deficiency, no flaw. If a miskin human being can praise another miskin human being who's limited and flawed, what does it mean about us praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So finally, Allah deserves worship by virtue of who He is. So if you want to have a better connection with Allah, find out who Allah is. Many of us don't even know Allah's names and attributes. And we don't know how to understand them correctly. So the homework is, know your Rabb. And that's how you know how to really understand why Allah deserves worship in the first place. It's by virtue of who He is. Allah, Al-Ilah, the one who's worthy of worship. His name is genderless and has no plural. And He, by virtue of His existence, deserves worship by who He is. Even if He didn't exist, He deserves worship. So I leave that note to pass on to the Sheikh. Jazakallah for the time. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.